John, they say what a difference a day makes. Well, 2 months certainly does, because the last time we had a chat of this nature, we were outside and it was absolutely sweltering.
Yeah, Stuart, I think I just about lasted the 20 minutes before I started to sweat quite profusely. And then you look this afternoon, it's been torrential rain. It's I think we're into single figures in terms of temperature. It's quite cold. You can feel it today. So I'm pleased that we're in a warm environment to do this.
Well, we have quite a lengthy chat ahead of us because we have lots of things to talk about. You are the football operations manager. You are a man of many talents. You also wear a number of different hats at the New Saints, and we're going to cover a number of topics as we chat here in the first team dressing room. First of all, John, let's look at the academy, shall we? And in particular, since you've been involved with the setup there, the progress that's been made, particularly from a strategic and structural perspective.
Yeah, I think when I spoke to you last, I mentioned to you that we were applying for Category A in the new categorisation process for Wales, and that's progressing quite nicely. We've had a recent visit from the FAW to look at sort of our off-field stuff. There's still quite a bit to do. I won't lie about that, and at times progress is a little slower than I would like. However, we do have the rest of this year to sort of to sort of transition a lot of those things into our academy setup, and I'm highly confident that we'll do that, and naturally we'll get to where we want to be, which is to be a Cat A, and probably one of the very few that maybe acquire it in Wales. I obviously don't know that for a fact, but in terms of where we sit within the system and the way that we do things and our productivity, you would like to think that we would stand a better chance than most.
And obviously there's a lot of things that goes on behind the scenes, but for those looking on perhaps, how would they notice? What difference would they see in terms of where we are now, or if we do achieve that Category A status?
Yeah, I think first of all what you'll see on the pitch is the high quality of coaching that we've got all the way through our various phases in the academy, from under 8s all the way through up to under 19s, even into our 21s and beyond. You'll see that high level of coaching. I was looking at the other day on our audit process. I think at majority of our coaches now are at UEFA B and above, which is a really, really high standard. I think if I was being honest, I think we still need to perhaps attract another couple of potential part-time coaches to support that activity that's going on. What's also really good is that within our 3 phases, we now have structurally aligned. We have 3 heads of phases in Simon Smith, Kieran Lee Birch and Ash Russell. But we also have assistant heads of phases in Simon Spender. Liam Kelleher's just recently been appointed in the last week or so, and Hudson Parry working in the foundation phase. So we've got that structure aligned, and then they have a team of part-time coaches that are working underneath. So we're in a really strong position there. And obviously you've got Chris Sargent that heads all of that up, and I assist along on sort of the off-field stuff really. So we're in a really, really good position going forward with that. I think where we need to get to now, and we're trying to work very hard on this, is to look at the support services within the football club. So I think I might have mentioned last time the analyst department, strength and conditioning, medical. We've got now 2 analyst interns that have recently come into the football club, so they're working with the academy, and that's starting to bear fruit already in terms of the presentations to players, how games are clipped, how individuals are clipped. We talked about the emerging talent program last time. Part of those analyst sort of tasks are to provide individual clips for those players to move them forwards, so that's really good. As I say, I'd like to try and get into a position now where I can get a strength and conditioning coach and probably 2 medical support staff in as well. I've got conversations going on at the moment to do that. I suppose the longer term objective of that is to get in a position where we can have full-time positions in all those 3 areas.
And in terms of not just developing players but attracting players from a wider area, would it be true to say that certainly with the status that we're trying to achieve, that it's not just about Wales but England and perhaps beyond?
Yeah, and the criteria will say to you more of a mileage. So you're looking around a 60-70 mile radius, I suppose, from where we sit now. So if you drew a circle from Parkall out 70 miles in terms of radius, that certainly encompasses a lot of areas, a lot of land. So yeah, and as you say, you refer England being one of them, and obviously we can go into mid Wales, potentially towards North Wales, the Wirral. Looking further south, we're going down some, back towards Shrewsbury, where I'm from, and so there's lots of different catchment areas in which we're able to sort of attract players.
And one of the things we've talked about in the past, John, it's very important, of course, pathway. And we do see that at the New Saints, that the academy setup is geared and structured so that players can not only progress through the academy system itself, but also into the first team.
Yeah, I think I've been here, 4 years now, and I think in that time we've given out 15, 16 professional contracts. In terms of how that relates to other clubs, I don't know, but I would say that figure is quite significantly high. If you were to average that, that's 4 a year. I think if you look elsewhere, you're possibly looking at maybe 2, 3, unless you get a really strong cohort. It's a really positive sign. I think that's where we, longer term, I think from a first team recruitment perspective, I think that may be the sustainable way for the football club to travel. Don't get me wrong, we're in a position where we want to get extremely good football players into the first team, but if we can also get them through an internal source, then that's great. On the other side of that coin, of course, you look at the opposition coming up this weekend. It's Cardiff Met. I think you look at two of the players that are playing for Cardiff Met regularly, which is Lewis Rees and CJ Craven. They are products of the system here. So not only are you perhaps preparing players to play in the league for our team, you're also helping, or certainly developing, players who go and play in the league, and actually those players, I've seen them, are holding their own as well.
And at this moment in time, we have a number of younger players signed professional contracts who are out on loan as well. How important is that in their development?
Massively, because it's their first experience of senior football. And personally, I'm a big believer that they need to be stretched, they need to be challenged, and the only way that's going to happen is if they go out and play senior football, men's football, and experience that physicality that comes with senior football. Because I think what happens is they play within their own age groups, and yes, they're extremely talented in their own age group, and you see that they stick out, but it's a whole different ball game when you get into the professional ranks, and certainly when you're playing in tier 2, tier 3, there's no how do I put it, seasoned players, shall we say, don't really care about those reputations of those players, and will treat them how do I put it, with that respect that maybe they deserve, in terms of it's your first experiences of that real physical, where some players will be kicked, and you've got to stand up and compete and hold your own, and that's a really important learning mechanism as well, because that's all that develops the sort of those psychological aspects, like their character, for example. How do they react to being fouled, and so on and so forth. So we see that as a really good tool for getting them closer to what we want in the first team environment.
And so far, John, we've talked about the men's side of things, but of course we have a very healthy, positive women's setup here at Parkall, and likewise you're looking to develop that pathway through their system into the first team as well.
Yeah, and that as I say, that's taking time. But what I can say now, and I think I might have hinted at this when we last spoke, there was a couple of things that were in the offing. One of those is that we've developed over, I think it's the course of 20 years, we've developed a really good working relationship with North Shropshire College, working on the male scholarship side of things. The intention next year from September is to run a programme specifically for girls, which aligns alongside the male programme in place. So I suppose the unique selling point when I've done the research is that although there are clubs that do mixed programmes, this would be a standalone programme for girls only. So that would make it rather unique in its selling point But again, it would work in the sense that they would have their football coaching, and obviously they would do their education at the college. Because of it being the first year, it's not likely that you would get a team out of that. But of course, we have the under-19s pathway anyway, so that would be their route into the football club here. And of course, if they're good enough, and we know that Andy and Greg have done this with those younger players, if they're good enough, they're certainly transported into the first team as well. So there's a real good opportunity there. I think if we can get that programme off the ground and certainly get into a second year, we would have a larger cohort to select from, which would therefore mean that we would then be able to participate in games on Wednesday afternoon in those national leagues alongside the boys that in their programme. So the aim is to sort of match what's currently happening in the boys programme with a girls specific programme, which will be exactly the same way aligned.
And the setup with North Shropshire College sounds very exciting. Obviously with the men we have full-time professionals, we have a scholarship system, they've been in place for many years. How difficult was it therefore to get the same thing going for the girls?
Yeah, it's like anything, it takes time. Obviously there's a long-term aim, and I think I sort of alluded to that in our last interview, that the long-term aim is obviously to do as well as they possibly can in the league, and if that brings about European competition, then that would be the ultimate sort of ambition, I think, really. So I think we've had to obviously set up the first team and get that in a position to where we're really happy. And the lights have gone off on us.
We'll carry on.
We'll carry on. That's good. So we're in that position. We've obviously developed an under-19s team underneath that as well. And of course, what I haven't sort of alluded to is that we do have a junior section, which I think is operating at 15s and 16s. So there are 4 teams in our women's and girls section that are performing well, and are, I suppose, creating a natural pathway. I suppose from my perspective, this is a way of not only creating the player pathway, but also an educational pathway for those young ladies.
And continuing with external organisations, there's some hot off the press breaking news as far as Glendower University is concerned.
And I've got to be honest, I need to thank Andy Williams for this, really, because it was his sort of initial contact and an idea that sort of set the ball rolling on this. So the idea was born out of recruiting for the women's first team, in the sense that if there's a young lady that perhaps lives in Manchester, for example, but wants to come and study, and we're in a position where we can offer football in our first team for that talented individual, the two would marry up. So obviously from the university's perspective, it's an additional student, and obviously from the football club's perspective, it's an additional player. But we had those initial discussions, and then we sort of decided that actually there's a bigger piece of work here. So that sort of manifested itself in terms of we can now, with our under-19s group, if we don't offer all those players a contract, then there's a way in which they can continue, not only they can continue their football by going to Glendower University and also playing, for a good standard team on a Saturday, but also they continue their education pathway. And what's really been important for myself is that not only do we have that football pathway alongside it, there's also an educational pathway. So if you look at it now from the ages of 16 beyond the 19 plus age group, there will be an educational pathway again coming from next September for players that were in this football club.
And continuing with the external organisations, not only a college, a university, but also an English Football League side as well.
Yeah, we've had good relationships with Shrewsbury Town over the years, and what's been happening, I suppose, in some respects, they obviously have seen the work that we do and like the players that we produce, and obviously that attracts those clubs. And I think what's really important is that when you, unfortunately, does come a point where a player wants to progress from the new Saints. We obviously want them to be here with the first team, but players want to progress and I guess would like to experience a different academy. What tends to happen is that the players leave and the hard work that the club has put into developing that player sometimes goes unrewarded. Shrewsbury Town have been forward thinking in that, and we've sort of got an agreement whereby if a player leaves the football club here for their academy and then reaches a certain point, so for example a scholarship, that would trigger a compensatory payment. And obviously, you know, you can negotiate deals that would include things such as getting a professional contract, first team appearances, and then that triggers various payments from there. But not only just that, you know, that benefit of it, there's also the benefit to us that obviously players that are released from Shrewsbury Town, certainly under 16s, it's a great exit route for those players to perhaps come the other way to us and come in, get involved in our setup in our academy, but also with the view to perhaps taking on the scholarship at North Shropshire College and then getting into our under 19s, and as we know, the pathway through the 19s into the 21s and eventually into the first team. So there are mutual benefits to both football clubs, and you know, I'm a great believer that you need to build partnerships and relationships with different organisations and people, and I think that's how you achieve more anyway. And I think by doing that, this is certainly you know, puts us on the right pathway.
Well, the lights have come back on.
They have.
We continued in the darkness, and we'll carry on now that the lights have returned. Finally, John, we did a chat with, or we had an interview with Simon Spender last weekend when the first team were in South Wales. You watched that, and of course, the last time we spoke as well, you referred to the under 21s.
I did. I mean, you know, it's a great setup, and I suppose the reasons for, well, certainly there's obviously personal reasons, I guess, for Simon and Greg playing as well, but there's also the external reasons that obviously, as like you said, you know, Simon I think said, you know, it's more difficult for him to get his messages across from the sideline where he's actually playing on the pitch. Then he can do that far more effectively, and those young players are getting the benefits of playing with two club legends. And actually, from a structural perspective, if you look at a lot of the top clubs in England, you look at Manchester United, for example, they will now have sort of player development coaches that are playing in the under 21s league specifically. I mean, I think at Manchester United, I think it might be Tom Huddleston that's the person there. And I think if he's still there at Southampton, I think Ollie Lancashire does it for Southampton. So what you could argue is that it's aligned towards that setup, and I think, you know, that it's really beneficial. It's actually quite interesting because Simon came to me and moaned at me because I've changed it from the reserve team to the under 21s, and you know, I mean, I've now called it the under 42s or the over 42s, which is to double it up a little bit. So, you know, but you know, the lead put in there, but you know, it's been really, well, you can see the results anyway on the pitch and the performances that have translated from that. And it's not just those guys. Obviously, you've got the likes of Simon Smith, Connor Roberts, Sarge involved, really pushing those players and developing those players and making sure that they're what I would call first team ready.
When we last spoke, the under 21s was in that embryonic stage. It was beginning. It's now been going for a while. Was it always part of the plan for Simon Spender, Greg Draper to be involved as players from the beginning?
Probably not, if I'm honest. I think that was an idea that was initiated by them. If I'm being, in all honesty, and being fair to them, they probably moaned enough to be able to get themselves a shirt onto the pitch. But obviously with that in mind as well, that you can see as I've just explained about, you know, sort of in Man United and Southampton of this world, that why not? You know, it makes perfect sense, and I suppose in that reserve that you can drop a number of overage players in any way, and actually that's still akin to what happens in the under 21s in England now. You know, you can play a certain amount of overage players anyway, so it's not too dissimilar.
John, I've really enjoyed our little chat and the insight that you've given to us, not only into what you do at the club, but what goes on behind the scenes has been invaluable. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Stuart.